Thanks for tuning in to the Boardroom. Excited to have you here and joining us virtually. We're in for another exciting episode of the Boardroom today. And as you know, we've launched or some of you may know, we've launched a series on transparency. So being transparent to all of you, our community. Today, you can call in live with any question about the association whatsoever. And you should see the phone number listed there on your screen. Or you can call in a question for our guests, from our panelists. And I'll introduce them in a moment. But I do want to share some really exciting news that's hot off the press. It was announced to our board of directors on Friday evening. And that is that the New Jersey School Boards Association has been recognized as a top impact company for 2024. Really exciting news. This group is called Real Leaders, and Kevin Edwards, president, and Mike Brown, chief impact officer, are doing some incredible work recognizing companies and businesses who are thriving while making this world a better place. And we were listed under the category of accountability most transparent. So very fitting with our podcast series and the exciting work that we do at New Jersey School Boards Association. So we have some exciting panelists with us here today, and I'm going to allow them to introduce themselves, but in honor to have the three of you here, I'm going to begin with my right hand, my general counsel, Carl Tanksley.
Yes, good morning. Carl Tanksley, general counsel for the association. I'm here to answer questions and kind of give you some guidance on what the general counsel does. And to my left is Kim Gatti.
Good afternoon. Kim Gatti. I am the Director of Policy for New Jersey School Boards Association. And I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about policy, practice, maintenance of your manual, and we'll kind of dive into some of those as we go through.
Thank you and good afternoon. Kathleen Asher, Director of Legal and Labor Relations. And we're going to talk about, again, whatever you want to talk about, but we'll give you a little overview of our programs and what's available to you. And it's a real honor to be here.
Well, it's great to have the three of you on our panel today. And real quick, I'm going to give our listeners the phone number, which should be displayed on the screen. And that is 609-278-5292. So we hope you call in with some great questions for our panelists, or you could certainly ask any question you'd like of me and the association. So let's begin. I'm just going to fire a few questions off just to get us started. And I'll start with Kim, if you wouldn't mind.
Excellent.
Can you share for our listeners, our viewers, a little bit about the difference between a policy and a regulation?
Absolutely. So the policy is sort of your broad overarching principle or concept. And policy is the essential role of the board member. By statute, the board can make, amend, repeal the policy. The regulation is really more of those nuts and bolts. So we want to make an analogy for statutes and regulations. Statutes are the overarching concept. Regulations are the details, the nuts and bolts. So we could talk about it in the perspective of, it's a forest and the regulation are our trees. They are the nuts and bolts, and they are really typically more honed in on by your administration in terms of how things operate. Some policies lend themselves better to regulations or to having regulations than other policies do. And so that's sort of the concept, to understand that the policy is this overarching principle and your regulations are, how you enact them.
Excellent. And actually, I should have started with this. Talk a little bit about, what does New Jersey School Boards Association do with policies? What is the work you do, and how does it align to the work that we do as an association?
So, as I said, policy is one of the most essential functions of the board member. And so in order to service you in that way, as part of dues, there is a plethora of information available to all school board members on our website. If you navigate to our services into policy, and I know that our website is potentially changing in the near future, so that navigation may look a little different, but right now you go into policy and you log in. There Our sample, the critical policy reference manual includes samples with legal references, even hyperlinks in most instances, so you can actually see the law or see the case or see the guidance from the department that created or gave rise to the necessity of that policy or the language of the policy. We also maintain information on discretionary policies that are that some districts have enacted over the years that may be a good practice potentially, depending on what your community is addressing at the time. We have information on job descriptions, contact information on how you can reach the policy office. We have senior manager, people who are available to you to help you navigate that process. If you're sitting on your policy committee and you're kicking around an idea, you want to see what other districts have done. We have that information. If it's novel, new.
So you'll work with, say a district is interested in implementing a certain policy or addressing a certain need of their community. You'll work with them to design a policy that best meets their needs.
Yes, we can look through samples. Like I said, if it is something new and it's a national issue, we have resources available, and then we can take a look at some language to potentially talk through some ideas or concepts. We always strive to provide that sort of level of detail, and we recommend that at the end of the day, whatever you land on, that it is reviewed, by counsel to ensure that it meets your district's needs, reviewed at your administration to make sure that you can implement the policy. But we're happy to give you resources and work with you on development of those.
Great, thank you. And Kathleen, thank you for joining the show.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
Can you talk a little bit about the work you do? You have the legal labor side, and while Kim has the policy side. Talk a little bit about the work that you do and how it relates to the work that we do.
Okay. We do a lot of exciting work. We work with Kim very closely as well, but we do provide, and to be clear, we provide information and resources in the legal area as well as labor relations. And on the legal side, we have great programs, probably our Attorney of the Day being one of our more popular.
Talk about the Attorney of the Day, because this is a service that maybe our members may not be aware of, that we provide as part of our membership.
Absolutely, sure. It is a program. We have both a phone line and a email line that people on any day can email or phone into us and get questions on, again, legal information or resources. There is someone staffed every day. One of our staff attorneys is assigned. We literally have a master calendar that is assigned every day. So there's always someone there. We will get back to you within 24 hours, and we will provide you with as much information as we can on an issue. Just to be clear, sometimes we do have to give the answer that we cannot give official legal advice, which is officially.
It's an important disclaimer. Yeah,
it is. And that's officially putting a set of facts into the law and telling you whether you can or cannot do something. So that's what legal advice is. And that's why we can't do that, because you all have great board attorneys back at your districts that we are both, ethically, and we just shouldn't be doing it,
right.
Opining or giving second opinions or acting in the stead of the board attorney. It just isn't, that's not our role. And you obviously have great staff back there and a great board attorney to refer to.
And while we're on the topic, and certainly any of you can chime in, but the Attorney of the Day, what are some examples of some of the questions that you receive or your team receives?
We do, always around election time, whether it be the November or the April, we get election questions, or how to fill a vacancy is always a big question. We can provide you with the statute, and also a big part of that is policy, and referring them back to their policy on how to fill a vacancy. So we do, we work together, and we have to know that answer, because a lot of times the answers are right there in their policy, and they just, sometimes it's something that just doesn't, you don't think to look at it, but there's always a lot of great stuff in their policies that, where the legal and the policy overlap.
Great, thanks. And Carl, interesting position, general counsel. Can you talk to our viewers a little bit about what you do, your role in the association?
Sure. General counsel is kind of a generic term, but essentially I'm responsible for compliance with statutes, compliance with regulations. So I work very closely with GR, with policy, and with legal. So I was very happy to see Kathleen talk about our disclaimer, because we do not provide legal advice, just legal information. And that's one of the things that's important to the association and myself as general counsel, is making sure that we do cover those types of issues. But also, the general counsel office covers a plethora of matters that come before the association, whether it's labor law, whether it's personnel, whether it's procurement, whether it's RFPs, contractual issues. All of those issues come before the general counsel's office, and we kind of make sure that things flow smoothly, so questions are answered, and hopefully the workflow is not interrupted, so we get the product out and get issues out and resolved in a timely fashion.
Thanks. And I want to remind our listeners that you can call in with any question. I'm sitting in the room with so much power right here. This is incredible. You can take advantage of this by certainly calling in with any question that you might have. Again, the number is 609-278-5292. And if it's okay, I'll just continue to fire away questions if that's okay with all of you.
Right ahead.
So Carl, can you talk a little bit about your role with Oprah and some of the work that you do there? I think that might be interesting to some of our listeners.
Sure. As general counsel, I'm also assigned as the records custodian for the association, which means that the general counsel's office is responsible for ensuring that public records are kept and maintained and are accessible. And we're also responsible to respond to Oprah requests, again, in a timely fashion within the 7 business days as required by statute. We maintain records in perpetuity for some of the records, dating back to 1912 when 1914 when the organization was founded. So we have records going back as that far. And we also keep track of other public decisions, commissioner decisions, and administrative decisions that have come out. Our library of commissioner decisions extends back to 1914. And we have that history, that long history of records issuing out of the commissioner's office. So if you have an Oprah records request, be it for a policy or be it a presentation that we may have done in the past at a public meeting, we do have access to that. And if requested, we can provide it pursuant to Oprah.
Thank you, Carl. I'll move back over to Kim. So Kim, can you talk a little bit about the impact of law on regulations, on policies, and how that impacts the work you do and what you provide districts?
Yes. So law provides the basis in most cases for what the policy says. Sometimes it's the basis for the existence itself of the policy. When you go to, the HIB statute requires a board have a policy, it's publicly posted. And so they are extremely connected in that way. I know that the intersection of the two, the board is the policy-making body, but there are instances where the board is provided with legislation in a bill, and this is the law of the land, so to speak, and there has to be a policy. But the board does maintain discretion in what that policy says in terms of the words that are used and the language and how it's phrased. But at the same time, there are legal requirements that must be met. Beyond legal requirements, there are state monitoring requirements. You should have certain policies that relate to CUSAC and different things. And so law really informs our statutes, regulations, guidance from the Department of Education, federal statutes. They all inform the creation and the growth, the development of a policy itself.
If I can jump in here too, that's an important concept because we very often get questions from board members regarding policy. And sometimes they're upset because the law will specify a certain policy. And the question is, well, we thought that local control was primary in New Jersey and the board should have the authority to adopt or not adopt policy, which is true. As Kim said, the board does have to adopt policy pursuant to law, but the board also has discretion. As long as that policy doesn't conflict with law and is compliant, then you're free to act above and beyond what the law requires. As long as you're not taking away from that law, then the board does have some discretion at least, although some board members argue that they have limited discretion.
Yeah. So that's the floor and ceiling concept sometimes comes into play where, the law requires this, I'll call it minimum for purposes of our discussion, but it doesn't mean the board can't offer more above it or, potentially dependent upon what the policy is, work within the confines of what that law is. Again, working through that, working in your policy committees and obviously always ensuring that you go back to your solicitor, have that reviewed to determine that it is legally sufficient. And, we're not looking to engage in litigation over policies. And so the idea is the policy is designed to help guide the board to avoid those things. It doesn't always work out that way, but that is the concept of the policy. It really, the law informs it.
Great, thank you. Thank you both. Kathleen, school districts are required legally to provide certain training. Can you talk a little bit about some of that training and the importance of its completion?
Sure. Yeah, one of our main purposes statutorily are to provide mandated training to your first, second, third year board members, as well as the first year of every subsequent term that they may have. And we provide all of that, and Legal and Labor provides a good portion of that. Policy provides a good portion of that, and we, as often as we can, we're there to provide that training that all board members are required to have, and that's one of the things I enjoy most is that
Right.
Mandatory training. We also in legal, we can come into districts and we can provide training on HIB, which is one of our bigger ones, which is a requirement every year. That not that we have to do it, but they should have a training every year on HIB at the district, at the local level. And again, it doesn't have to be us, but that's usually a pretty hot topic that often we get asked to come in and do, as well as, school ethics training, superintendent contract training. We can come into a district and do that as well.
Yeah. And that's so important that districts comply with that.
It's essential.
Yeah. If not, what happens?
Right. School Ethics Commission they are the enforcement agency. Just to be clear, we are not the enforcement agency. We are the training agency, but School Ethics Commission is charged with enforcing absolutely those mandatory requirements. And what can come in is if they feel that, we are required to report that as well. We provide the SEC with all the information on that training. And if it becomes an issue, they can sanction a board member with regard to failure to train. And that can lead from everything to depending on when they get it done, if they're out of compliance, it can lead to everything from a suspension.
Right.
It absolutely can. And we don't want anyone to get to that
No,
point.
we certainly don't.
We really don't.
No, and we like to encourage board members to get the training in, kind of like voting, early and often. So if you go ahead and get that in, and it makes our lives a whole lot easier. And we don't have to report any names to the SEC.
Right. Thank you, Carl. So here's your chance to call in. I've got 3 attorneys here. This is a powerful group. Certainly, and your opportunity. So please consider calling in. Number here is on the bottom of the screen, 609-278-5292. So Carl, back to you. I know that this work encompasses a portion of your job and the amicus participation. Would love for you to talk a little bit about that. A lot of our members may not be aware of the work that you do here. And if you could share a little bit about what you do and how it relates to our association.
Sure. One of the huge advantages of having the attorneys in the association is that we can support districts with amicus briefs. All the attorneys in the building are licensed, or in the association are licensed, which means that they can actually practice before all the state and federal courts and administrative agencies of the state. So be it the commissioner, be it the Superior Court, be it the Appellate Division, or State Supreme Court, or the federal court, the District Court or the Third Circuit, and even up to the Supreme Court. We are authorized to practice before those bars, as long as you're admitted in the bar of the Supreme Court, then we are authorized to practice. What we do is we scan cases and review them on a routine basis to look for cases that have a statewide impact. And if we believe a case does fit the criteria for amicus participation, we will reach out to the board attorney and let them know that we are monitoring their case and ask if they would like us to participate. Or sometimes the attorneys themselves will reach out to us with an interesting case to say, we have a case that we believe has a statewide impact. Would school boards be interested in participating? After an initial conversation and review of that matter, if we think it's appropriate, then we will go ahead and file an amicus brief to participate in that case at whatever level it's at. So we provide support for boards of education and for the board attorney with a unique, what I like to think is a unique statewide perspective and dealing with various issues that arise around the state. What's interesting is that issues in the north, issues in the central part of the state and southern part of the state, when it comes to students, are pretty much standard. They all have the same concerns, all have the same issues. And we try and get involved in those issues where we feel we can have an impact and provide the courts or administrative agencies with that statewide impact from not just a district, but from all districts or a majority of districts across the state. So that's a service that we like to offer, and we're very happy to do so.
And I can imagine that the courts appreciate when our voice is there. It does represent, a lot more districts than if they were represented, with their own attorney and counsel.
What's interesting when you're at oral argument is the judges always listen to the participants, both plaintiff and defendant in the case, but they understand that they each have their own perspective. They're advocating for their side. As a statewide agency, we're more objective, we're more independent, and we may support the district, but not take the exact same line of reasoning with the district. And the courts will appreciate that additional perspective. So I think that we provide a value to districts when we participate as amicus.
Great, thanks. Kim, question about policy manuals, right?
Yes,
And the importance of keeping them up to date. I mean,
absolutely.
these are documents that should not be sitting on a shelf somewhere, but
Correct.
rather actively engaged in the oversight of the district operations. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So, going back to the idea to your point about they shouldn't just be sitting on a shelf. They serve a purpose. Their requirements, there's
Right.
information on how to handle a situation in a building. It's sort of like the playbook. I mean, I always say, if you play football, the quarterback has a play. They know where they're going to throw the ball. And that's what the policy manual, really is. And so it shouldn't sit idle. And if it sits idle, unfortunately, for too long, pieces of new plays that come in, they don't make it into the manual, right? And so
Yeah.
then you have, receivers running in routes. I like football, by the way.
We couldn't tell.
So when there's new legislation, a new bill, a change to something, a case that, turned out in a different way that, policy requires, an update because of guidance from the department. It could be any number of things that come through. You want to make sure that you're looking at those whatever vendor you use, providing those updates, implementing them, adopting them into your policy, working through them, asking the questions. If you have a policy committee, you're regularly receiving those updates. But in addition just to the updates, I think there's an element of ensuring that you're reviewing other sections of your manual sort of on a rotating basis is
What
important
do you
to think about.
recommend in terms of, how often
Yeah,
each
if you
section is
if you
reviewed?
operate by committee annually, your committee head might want to have a schedule where you tackle 2 sections over the course of a year, and you look at a beginning date for each section with an end date for it to go back to the full board, for everyone to take a look at the work you've done. So there you can implement a schedule that
Yeah.
in the midst of all of the things that happen in a school year, all of the new legislation and the issues that may be coming up in your district that you're trying to tackle on a regular basis. We're in budget season right now. So that's forefront
Right.
for many people. But trying to have a schedule so that you don't lose sight of ensuring the maintenance of that manual. And we offer a due service called the Wellness Check, where we can help you ensure by looking at your manual to see. It's kind of like an audit where we can tell where the gaps are, what you've missed,
So
what you might
if a
need to.
district wants to complete a wellness check, what do they have to do? So say a board member's listening now and they're like, I wish we need to look at our policies. What would they do? What's the next step?
You can send an email to policy@njsba.org indicating the district that you're from. We look to make sure that the superintendent or the school business administrator and or the board president is aware of the request and in agreement with the request to have that. We have a queuing system that we use. We ask that you provide the policy manual to us, whether it's a hyperlink on the web or if it's actual PDFs. And then we place you in that queue system and we work through them. It is a very popular service, I will say.
Yeah.
And so there is a queue system and it does take a couple months for us to turn around a full review of your manual.
But worth the wait.
Yes.
And what I've noticed in communities that struggle with this is the importance of transparency. So here we are, we're on a podcast series related to being transparent. How important is it for boards with transparency, considering they're public, when they adopt a new policy or revisions to a current policy? How does that look in terms of engaging the public or having them aware of the work they're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. The policy process, it doesn't necessarily have to be in isolation of the committee. We always make recommendations when you're looking at defining what the need is, bringing in those important perspectives, whether, it's a community organization, whether it's a staff organization. If you're looking at an instructional policy, you might have a group of educators that you look to within your district. Typically on a policy committee, we see an administrator, because you want to make sure that the policy is workable within your district. So as you develop that and work through it, it's informed by sort of, I'll call it, for lack of a better word, the experts in the area. And then you can get some buy-in potentially. They're aware of what's coming down the pike. They understand what it is. They've been able to work with you on what that language might be. And so it's not, it's not coming out of left field, so to speak. Check your bylaws on how many readings you have to have. Your bylaws will control how you formally engage in that adoption process. But I think that the policy development process is really where you can kind of get that community.
And just a Purnell pointer, this isn't representative of their thoughts, but your first and second reading should not be at the same meeting, right? So you shouldn't be forcing policy or regulation to be approved. It should go through the process and the proper process to allow reflection. And I think there's strength when you implement the proper process. So,
Right. And if I can just add in, I think there's also strength when you do get community buy-in. So if you're being transparent, you're not trying to hide anything or rush something past the public. That's even if you're not doing anything wrong, but that's when you get some suspicions about maybe you are trying to hide something. So it's always better to go through the process that you have, first and second reading, give plenty of notice, accept those community comments. And sometimes, they add value and they add to the policy. So it's not a bad thing to have community input, and it's a good thing to have transparency.
agreed. And I see that when you look at some of the issues that have come to the surface in local school districts, even in New Jersey, some of it may have to do with the policy, but I think more of it has to do with the lack of transparency and proper communication to the community. And it's a great point. You want the community to trust the work that the board does. They've put you in the position in some cases, obviously in other cases, the mayor has appointed that board member. But for the most part, that community trust is so important, and proper the community is key. I go back and forth with my screen just to see if we have a question, but I'm going to move back to Kathleen. Put your labor relations hat on.
Will do. Yes.
And can you talk a little bit about collective bargaining?
Okay. Yeah, it's always, right now we're in an exciting time. It is kind of, folks are, because the budget numbers came out, and that's a lot of districts are also in their collective bargaining time right now. So we are, and what we're probably best known for is our collective data that we keep, and that Sandy Raup, our business data analyst, keeps information with regard to contract settlements and all the things that people are agreeing to, or maybe what they call a give back. But that stuff does not need to be recreated by the board members. We have all that information. And now we have an online self-generating report program that can be where you can, if you're sitting at the table at midnight and, somebody needs to know what the settlement rate is in Ocean County, they can look that up and generate a report.
Yeah, this is a new element that we added last year, correct? So what you need to do as a member, you need to log in, right? Because it is members only.
Correct.
Information. And then they can specify what criteria they'd like, right?
It is. It's really great. You go into labor, if you go into our services on our landing page and go into legal and labor relations, the first thing that pops up is that data report generator.
Yeah.
And you will get in, and it will take you right to where you can create little drop downs. It tells you so that you can compare your districts with like districts, same size, same grade levels that you're accomplishing.
So if you're a regional high school, you can compare to other regional high schools, and you
Right.
can specify, I just want these two counties. Right.
You can limit by counties, district factor groups.
And the data and the information within that portal is up to date, correct?
It is live time. It is live time. As Sandy gets the information in, she's putting it in right away, and it is at any given time. It is as most up to date as literally she can get it in there. It used to be in the older days, it would have to be every quarter, just because we didn't have that technology. And she worked so hard along with our IT department to have that. So it's not, she was great at generating reports, but she can't be at her desk 24/7. So it's just a great tool that's been very popular.
So we do have a question online. I'll read the question and would love your response. The question is, Can you explain how the new law regarding April elections impacts boards of education? How the new law regarding April elections impacts boards of education?
Kathleen, I think I'll let you start that off.
Okay. Right. There has been a change in that there were, for a time, those districts that there was a little bonus to having your election in November,
Yeah.
so that you did not have to put certain things about your budget out to the public. That has now been rolled back a little bit, so districts do have the option to go back to the April election format, and they do not have to, unless they are going above the 2% cap, they do not have to put that question out to the public. And with that, there's still, we get some questions about, where do the costs go? Because that's a real question. And if you do have that, if a district does have that April election, they still bear the costs because it's not part of that November.
Right. So they have that opportunity to partner with the municipality. And if they choose to do their own, then they will burden the costs associated with the election.
Right, because it doesn't
Yeah.
get folded into that already
Right.
existing November election. But it's a change, and we haven't seen too many districts try it yet, but the legislation was signed very quickly before districts would have had to put that on the ballot. So I think when they have a little more time, more districts might consider this in the future.
And we have seen districts that have gone back to April elections. One of the things that is really important to us here at New Jersey School Boards Association is that we are a nonpartisan organization. But that doesn't necessarily mean moving your election back to April removes the partisanship. But we work diligently to ensure that our elections are nonpartisan. Carl, you were going to add something.
Right. One of the things that Tim mentioned at the outset is that we do support local control. And having two choices on when the election takes place does support that goal. November might be better for your district. April might be better for your district. We're not an agency that's going to tell you which is better or which is the better fit for you. That's for the board to decide and for the community to decide. So we like the aspect of local control, and having nonpartisanship is a benefit, hopefully a benefit of having that local control. And the boards can decide which best suits their needs.
And that playing field's a little more level right now because of that change. There's, you can put more of your own local decisions into whether it's November or April, and you don't have to think so much about the other things that are, now that they have changed.
Yeah, good point. We've got some other questions that are coming in here. The next one is it recommended that boards have an attorney at each meeting, or should that be determined by the issues being discussed at the board level and superintendent comfort level with addressing those issues? Any thoughts?
I think I'll jump on that one first.
He was jumping at the bit.
So school boards doesn't have a recommendation as to whether you should have a board attorney present at every meeting or not. Again, going back to the point of local control, that's a decision for the administration and for the board to decide whether there are a number of issues that should be addressed by the board attorney on a continuing basis, and the board attorney should be there, or whether the board attorney should only be there sporadically if an issue pops up. We understand that there's a cost associated with having the board attorney at those meetings, and we don't want to advocate districts spend funds unnecessarily. But if it's necessary and the board feels it's important, then yes, certainly you should have the board attorney there. But at the same time, you don't want the board attorney sitting at the meeting just reading a newspaper for half the meeting because he or she is not being utilized. So it depends on what's going on in the district. I wouldn't make an absolute all-out recommendation one way or the other.
Yeah. And that's important because that's a decision made, based on the needs or based on the circumstances you're going through. Great question. Again, if you'd like to call in with questions, we'll take your calls, or you can certainly enter questions into the chat box, but we can be reached at 609-278-5292. All right, so I'll just fire away questions until we hear more from our audience, and I'll bring it back to Kim if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Talk a little bit about bylaws and what is a bylaw, compared to anything else, and why is it important for boards?
It is the board's own governance. Those are like the policies that govern how a board operates, when you have your meetings, the voting requirements, appointments and election of board officials, we talked about how a policy is adopted, that will be in your bylaws. Meeting conduct is in your bylaws. You know, virtual meeting information is more regulatory, but the existence of all of that is related to how the board functions. So your bylaws are one section of your policy manual, and they, if you are a new board member, I always recommend that before your first meeting that you take a look, get through that section, because that's going to give you information on how, when you're up at the dais, what the expectations are, what the parameters are for what it is that you're doing. So it's really how you govern and conduct yourselves. Some policies or bylaws may be related to use of social media, related to your use of email, different things like that. So it's really about you as the board member and how you govern yourself.
And how active should, and this is actually a question for both Kathleen and Kim, how active should administrators be in the process, whether it be personnel related to negotiations or whether it be administrators in developing a policy? You mentioned before about their involvement, but talk about the importance of involving your district administrators in the process.
So from my perspective, the policy, you know, when you sit in a policy committee or if you operate as a committee of the whole, your administrator or group of are really integral to understanding how you can implement it and what is possible within your district. You don't want to create something that you can't implement, and provides, you know, whether it's a data need that you might have to develop a policy or information on how something functions within your district. But the board controls that policy. Going back to this idea of the regs, the day-to-day, the practical is really the administrator. But our perspective has been that administrator is an integral part of that discussion and that support for you as a board member in creating and developing your policies.
And as you're speaking, Kim, a question came
Yeah.
in related to the difference between a policy and a regulation.
Oh, okay. So policy is that overarching principle. The regulation is the nuts and bolts. So there are some policies that are better, that are, I guess, boosted or supported better by a regulation. So a use of facilities policy is a good example of that. Practical forms, practical information on how it's approved, how that process runs, you know, potentially and most likely through a business office. Policies related to special education are best supported or better supported with regulation. So that idea, I said forest for the trees. So your policy is your forest, your regulation are your trees, you know, an umbrella
Yep.
with raindrops, just to kind of put that in, you know, in a perspective that people can.
And oftentimes
Yeah.
when you go to a district website, you might see the board's policies, but you won't necessarily see the regulations. It's sometimes you will, but, you know, talk a little bit about that.
So many boards have their policies and their regulations. It's a sort of an ongoing question of whether your policy that has a backed regulation belongs tucked right next to it. Because if you don't see it right next to it, you don't really necessarily know it exists. So it's really a question of, for your district, of what makes the most sense for your district to have that regulation right next to your policy. Making sure they're also accessible online. A lot of times they have forms and exhibits that are in them that your public may need to use and access. When we
right.
talk about use of facilities, we talk about, again, going back to special education, field trips is another great example. There's forms related to, you know, permissions for field trips and things like that. So having regulations available online and sort of accessible in line with the policy can be very helpful for you know, for everyone involved, not just your community, but I also think, you know, your staff as well.
Excellent. And Kathleen, the role of the personnel administrator, if a district has one.
Right, or whoever
Whoever it is.
maybe wearing several hats, but that might be part of it. It's integral. It's integral both to just general bylaws as well as the collective bargaining agreements that might be in place, because when we look at our life cycle that we show during training, there's a long administration portion of it. As soon as that contract gets settled, you hand it off to your great district staff, and they are the ones that day to day have to make sure that the bills get paid and the salaries and the paychecks go out and the health benefits are paid. And if that's not, you have to have that input, because they also usually have a great historical knowledge of things that have worked, aren't working, what things are being grieved. And they can tell you, we tried that 6 years ago and it didn't work. So it is integral. They are the people that are just literally making that place run and making sure everybody gets everything that they need to. And I don't think you can bring them in
That's
enough.
Good. Excellent.
And if I can just join in on,
Yeah,
on
jump
that
in.
point, the institutional knowledge that the administrators have is invaluable, whether it comes to drafting policy or regulations or just implementing both or either. As Kathleen said, they have the day-to-day operational knowledge on what works, what doesn't work, what's been tried in the district. So it's really helpful to the board to rely on that administration for that experience. They're just one of the keys of the district that are really supportive if used properly.
Excellent. Kathleen, we got another question that came in related to if a board member does not meet the mandated required training, do you feel as though the penalties in place are enough to correct that change? Or that necessity?
Yeah, I mean, the sanctions are what the sanctions are, and they have become more enforced. And we know that we have that, the time to get trained has been lessened for the new board members. They now have 90 days to complete their entire Governance 1 training. And hopefully that, we've seen numbers that it's really getting, it has gotten the board's, the board's attention, and that they are getting trained. And I think it's really important that they get that training early. We're going to see, I guess, we need a little more information before we make sure that those folks are feeling that they are being essentially that they feel that they absolutely have to do this as they do, and that those sanctions are enough. I'm sure it will be up for, potentially up for review again after we see a little bit about how this program is. I'm not going to give you my official opinion or, any kind of an opinion, but there's a significant up to a significant suspension and up to removal if you do not do that. So they can, there's not a lot of ways a board member can be removed from office. They're elected officials or appointed, but this is one of the big ones. And School Ethics Commission is very dedicated to making sure they get that training. That is their object.
Right.
Thank you.
And we don't take a position as to whether the sanctions are appropriate or inappropriate. The sanctions are, as Kathleen said, what they are. If board members are not satisfied with those sanctions, think maybe they're too severe or not severe enough, there is a process by which they can address that. And that is by submitting a resolution to the Delegate Assembly to have the association then advocate for a change in law. So that's always available to boards. Our resolution deadline has passed for the May DA coming up May 18th, but there is still plenty of time for the November DA that's coming up late November.
Great, thanks. And we did get another question related to policies related to drug paraphernalia. And I think it's a long question, but I think the synopsis, and you can see it on your screen here. But basically, a situation where a student is removed from the setting for having drug paraphernalia, if they don't get tested, can they be permitted back into school? My response, and you guys can certainly weigh in whether or not it's an appropriate response, is that it's related to the district's policy and what is written, because if it's written, it exists, and this is what we follow in terms of the policy. Any thoughts on that?
The drug policy, there is required or mandated policy. So I would refer you to check the policy itself, and it will relate to the code of conduct. There's going to be that element that sort of interplays with that as well. But it would be, policy driven, potentially related to, again, going back to the law and what the requirements are in the mandated policy.
And in that case, it may be a regulation, right? The regulation may drill down further as to what they're actually doing to address the policy.
Yes, dependent on the district and the circumstances.
Yeah, a lot of that does depend on what is written. Yeah, but Kathleen, go ahead.
And there's also, every district has a memorandum of understanding with their local law enforcement.
Yeah.
So that is something that they should refer to too, because if it gets to that point where it might become an issue that it requires law enforcement intervention or reporting, they should also kind of read their policies along with that document.
And that memorandum is signed annually, correct? Yes. With the superintendent, between the superintendent and the local law enforcement.
Yes. And recently there was a rather robust update to it, but then every district, then tweaks it to their own, but certain portions do have to be in that. But that's also a really helpful document to know how to proceed as well.
Yes, the memorandum of agreement was just updated last year, and the association was one of a number of groups that had input into that, the development of the new memorandum. We spent about a year or so going back and forth with committee meetings, making revisions to a large portion of the memorandum. So it's up to date now, and it's a very useful resource. So if districts have questions on that issue, look to the memorandum.
Great, thanks. And we actually have a live call. If we can tap them in. If they're still, oh, we lost the call. Okay, no worries. We have another question here. Sorry, I'm bouncing back and forth. And this question, I'll wait till they're ready. Oh, okay. Can you provide information on the chain of command and how the chain of command impacts policy and regulation?
Well, I think the chain of command would flow from the board, who actually adopts the policy, through the superintendent, who makes sure the policy is properly implemented, to administration, who also ensures that the details of the policy are implemented and provide any feedback to administration and to the board with the operation of that policy, down through the teachers and janitors, custodians, and other staff that support the district as well. So I think I'm not quite clear on the question, but I think that answers the question.
Yeah, good answer. And if you were the caller that we lost, feel free to give us a call back here. We'd love to hear from you. Okay. At this point in the program, I'm going to ask you 3 questions.
Right.
This is, I think, it's like, here they
There
go.
you go, the hard ones.
That's right. I waited till the end to hit you with the hardest questions. So these are simple questions, but I think it's, we want to share, in terms of, what we love, and what we experience in life. So there's 3 questions. The first is, what book are you reading, and do you recommend it? The second is, what is a quote that you live by or something you embody? And the third is, name a mentor or someone who's provided inspiration for your life. So let's begin with Kathleen.
Okay, with the book?
Yeah.
Go for the book first. I am currently reading a book called Island of Vice, and it's not a new book. It came out in 2012, but it's about a portion of Theodore Roosevelt's life that people that may not know, that there's an employment law context to some work he did in 1895 to 1897. He was made a police commissioner, and it was seen as kind of a cushy job. He had previously been an assemblyman in New York, and it was supposed to be kind of a cushy job. And he got there and realized that it was a very interesting time in New York at that time. And there was a lot going on as far as, police and issues going on. And he pretty much created what the Civil Service Commission as we know it today during that time.
Wow.
Because it was just, everybody was appointing their brothers and sisters and
A lot of nepotism.
A lot of
We have a
nepotism.
policy for that, by the way.
That is an important one to have by law. So he kind of created this Civil Service Commission where people got their jobs because of written tests, and it was seen as a failure at the time. He took a lot of backlash for it because of the culture at the time. So his party disavowed him. It was seen as a failure, and now it's not. But that was something I did not, it was really interesting. I didn't know there was that portion in his life, and he pretty much created something that now we take advantage of.
Wow.
And that's what that book is about. So I would totally recommend it.
And Kim, any good books that you're reading?
Yes. So I started The Nightingale based on Marcia Levine on the first Boardroom podcast had mentioned it. I had heard things about it beforehand, but I was like, okay, I'm going to go buy it now. I can't say that I'm too far into it, but I do think that sometimes there are books that we read that stick with us. And so for purposes of there was a book I read in college called Breath, Eyes, and Memory by Edwidge Danticat. And it's the story of a Haitian woman, and her whole life is how she went through life discovering that she was the product of a rape, and how that impacted her life and her relationships. Wow. And she went back to Haiti and ended up coming back to the States. And it's like a memoir, but it covers so many topics that I think go to, the human experience and where we all come at the world from a different perspective, and understanding, where we've come from, and not always knowing everybody's story, and how that impacts their reactions to life and how they navigate the world. And I read that in college, and it was a book I'll never forget it. If anybody ever asks, it's one of my all-time favorite. Came out of nowhere. It was, an assigned reading, and it was quite a book.
Oh, wow. I'm going to put you on the spot here, but in a good way. We have a holiday gift exchange,
Oh.
and your gift to the other person was a book,
It was.
but you also said, let's meet and have coffee and talk about the book.
Yes.
And I thought that was such a nice element,
Yeah.
a humanistic element that you brought.
Yeah, and it turns out the follow-up to that book that I gave her came out, I want to say sometime shortly after, and she already purchased it and she read it
Wow.
before I even got to do the follow-up yet. So
She'll
Amy
have
was a
coffee
great
with
book.
you.
Yeah.
And Carl, you're up. Any books?
Okay. Well, not surprising from the attorney. I've been reading The Brethren by Bob Woodward and Scott Armstrong. It's not a new book, but it deals with the Supreme Court and the internal workings of the Supreme Court over several decades, actually. But it starts with the transition between the Warren Court and the Burger Court around the era where President Nixon was in office. And it focuses on the concerns of that nonpartisan body at the time. And we still have those concerns today. What was interesting to me, what was very interesting to me, was there were scandals that happened back then that we seem to have kind of forgotten about. And there were issues that popped up back then that were of major concern to the country that seem to have died down now. I know we're not maybe focused on, but are aware of some of the recent issues coming out of the Supreme Court that caused some concern and have been in the news lately. But what struck me was the fact that even though this seems more recent, it's been going on for a very long time. And it's good to have that perspective when you read the book, that even though it seems like it may be a crisis right now in the Supreme Court with some of the decisions that people are very opposed to, some of the actions of some of the justices, the justices have been under scrutiny, according to Bob Woodward, for a very, very long time. And it's very interesting how things are cyclical. And sometimes the Supreme Court is in the news for what it has done or what it has decided, and sometimes that attention fades away. So it helps provide perspective.
Wow. And certainly still relevant.
Very
Yeah. Excellent. So the next question is a quote that you live by, and we'll go in the same order. That's
Same order?
fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
I brought a prop.
Whoa, a
Brought a prop for mine.
This is the first prop I've seen. Okay.
But
On the
for
podcast series.
my quote is actually from Gandhi, and it is, think of the poorest person you have ever seen and ask if any of your next acts will be of any use to him. And I put that, my father bought this for me when I went to college, so it's a long time. And I put this, there's like a plastic file in the back,
Wow.
and that's in there. It's been in there since I went to college. It's melted in there. I couldn't get it out if I had to, but I do. I look at that every day and try to think if there's something
Wow.
I can do, just to change. And it's not, at the time I thought it meant poor as in maybe a financial issue, but I've come to learn that it's, it could mean anything. It could mean someone just that's having a bad day, that has things going on at home that you don't know about. Could you just say hi to someone that, maybe is having a bad day, and that's probably the best thing that's going to happen to them. So I do, that's my quote. That was an easy one.
I love it. Wow. Making the world a better place.
A little bit,
Yeah.
every at a time.
Kim, you're up.
Yeah, so this one was an easy one for me as well. I say it often. I think it relates to so many different parts of our life. For me, in the season of raising kids, seeing them sort of struggle with comparison and who's doing what and how. There's a Theodore Roosevelt quote. It's comparison is the thief of joy. And I really think that that's important for everyone to remember. If I'm running a race and I didn't make my time and someone else beat me, you can compare yourself, but it's not always about that. For our kids, I think in the world we live in the climate we live in, we're always seeing images. We're bombarded with social media that may not be real, and they're comparing themselves to these things. And you should, appreciate what you have and where you are. And if you had fun doing something, it didn't matter whether you were first necessarily. So it just relates to so many different things that I think we encounter every day. Comparison is the thief of joy.
I love it. It reminds me of a quote my dad used to use, and that was, "Don't let anyone steal your joy, ever." I love that. Great. Carl, you're up.
Mine was fairly easy too. My quote is from Camilla Kimball, and she says, "You do not find the happy life, you make it." And for me, what that means is really life depends on your attitude, your perspective. And you can choose to look at an issue as a problem, or you can choose to look at it as a challenge. And if you look at it as a challenge, it's a more positive reflection. It's a more positive aspect, as opposed to looking at everything as a problem. So I think that, and I teach my kids the same thing, is that when you perceive something new or something different or something that might be a little bit difficult for you, you don't need to always perceive it as a problem. It's your perspective. You can take a look at it and say, all right, I can get through this. I can get by this because I have the skills, I have the knowledge, or even if you don't have the skills or knowledge, you can learn them through going through the process. So for me, it's life is what you make of it.
Very powerful. Thank you. And the last is someone who has served as a mentor, an inspiration to you.
Okay, I'll go first. Yeah, my former supervisor when I worked for the Department of Corrections, he was the director of employee relations. And he really took me under his wing and just he took me to everything he went to, even when he was told not to, so that I could, meetings and things, so that I could really, he was just really selfless about including me in his world and giving me experiences. And he used to say, don't let anyone rush you into making any decisions you're not ready to make. Meaning if someone calls you for a real, and they just give me a 2-second answer, don't give it, because they will not remember that they rushed you. They'll only remember you gave them the wrong answer. And he said, even if it's me, he said, even if I do that to you, don't do it. Don't fall into it. Tell me you need however long you need to answer that question. Great. And yeah, so that always sticks with me.
And now I'm thinking whether or not I asked you a question that I needed a response to.
Oh, but that is great. You. That is such practical advice. I think it applies to all of us.
It does. And it really makes me stop, for a minute and just gather myself before because human nature is to want to help and answer.
Yeah, right away.
Right.
We need things now, right now.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Kim, you're up.
So two, first one is similar to Kathleen, a former supervisor, or when I was in private practice, he made me think of things in a different way and challenged, I would say something, even if he agreed with it. We got devil's advocate because he knew that was the benefit of the process. And at the end, I'm defending this, and he says, oh, but I agreed with the first thing you said. And it was frustrating at times. So don't think Pup-Up is listening, but we refer to him as Pup-Up. And then my dad, he always saw something. He would say he saw something in me. So I was never allowed to take the easy way out. And, that's a life lesson of, don't do it quick, do it right. And so, that's one of the things I refer to a lot as in my professional life.
Love it.
Okay. And similar to Kim, I had the same kind of experience with one of my mentors. Russell Weiss is my mentor. He's no longer with us now. But he was general counsel at the School Board Association back in the 80s. And by coincidence, I happened to be hired into his law firm, and I was one of his attorneys. And he was absolutely amazing with his knowledge of school law and labor law. No matter how hard I tried, I could not stump him with a question. And it took me years to understand that I may have been bringing new questions to him, but the way he made me go through the analysis, like Kim said, what are you looking at? What is the issue? What is your position on this issue? What are the other issues that are surrounding this issue? What is the issue that's diametrically opposed to what you're proposing? And going through that exercise was absolutely invaluable. And I learned it. Sometimes it was frustrating. Yep. Sometimes it was maddening. Sometimes it kept me up at night thinking, why are we going through this? But now I understand why he went through the process that way.
And once you figured out what the goal was there, in the moment, you don't always appreciate it. But perspective being what it is, at the time, it could be extremely frustrating, but it was always done from a place where I knew it was to develop who I was.
Yeah.
And, in that moment, you don't see it, but it's there.
I love the symbol, as you guys know, the rear view mirror, which was created by Dorothy Levitt, who was a race car driver, and she would hold up a mirror to see who was behind her. But that, essence of reflecting on something and its impact, and we don't know it in the moment. You're right. Well, thank you for joining us during your lunchtime. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. One last thing.
One last thing issue to deal with. And I think it's coming from staff. outside the door. So we could just take a,
I'm going to exit
a
the
look.
stage left.
no, I think you really have to be here to answer this question.
I
because
think
it
I'm
is
good
for
without
the
this
ED,
question.
Specifically designed for the ED.
I think we can
And I
end.
think only you can answer.
Thank you
this
for joining
question.
us. And we will see you on April 10th.
I don't think you're getting off that easy.
No, come on. No. It is not the official day, by the way.
Oh, you might want to look that way,
When-
actually.
Oh, stop it. Oh my gosh.
Happy birthday.
Oh,
to-
stop.
We have microphones.
Oh my God.
Happy birthday
to
to you.
you.
Happy birthday, dear Tim.
Happy birthday to
Oh
you.
my.
It's such a pleasure to work with all of you. Yeah, I get the opportunity to be the orchestrator, but the work comes from all of you. And it's an honor to be part of this family. Thank you for all you do. I should be celebrating you, but thank you. This is a nice surprise. So.
Happy birthday.